Dio, Stom was a good man. I will avenge his death. Dragonia will pay.
The Queen of Portoa told me that to continue my journey, I must enter the cave behind the waterfall. There's no cave.
I'm trying to tell you that Stom is dead, Dio. Dio, Stom is dead.
Good thing I have the Sword of Fire. Otherwise, I'd never be able to break this ice wall. Ha! Good work. Once I find my way through this pyramid, I'm coming for you, Emperor Dragon.
Will he be able to collect all the swords and defeat the evil Dragonian Empire?
You're a terrible actor.
When you think of top-down action-adventure games for the NES, you likely first think of games such as The Legend of Zelda, or maybe Star Tropics. SNK released their own game that seemed to be inspired by Zelda, but also added elements from RPGs such as Final Fantasy or Dragon Warrior. The result was Crystalis, or Godslayer Sonata of the Faraway Sky as it's known in Japan. I still remember the night my dad brought home Crystalis for us to play. It was a lot of fun, and I was hooked right away. It had a really cool, deep story, amazing soundtrack, and gameplay that was similar to The Legend of Zelda, but had some neat quirks of its own. Sure, you could throw your sword out in front of you and shoot a nice sword beam, but there was something about it that was special. I have a lot of good memories of this game. This was one of the most in-depth stories that I experienced on the NES. Sure, the dialogue that was there was pretty basic, but you had characters to meet and a story to follow. And that was really cool for me to experience as a kid. On October 1st, 1997, the world ends. Wow. I remember eagerly anticipating that date so I could play the game on the supposed end day. The intro sequences paint a picture of a new civilization reborn after a cataclysmic event. A civilization full of people who live in fear of the evil born out of construction of a great floating tower. There remains one hope to save the people of the world, the two heroes who are cryogenically frozen in time. You play as an unnamed hero who is collecting elemental swords and fighting against the Emperor Dragon and his Dragonian Empire. Throughout your quest, you meet the four wise men, Zebu, Tornell, Asina, and Kensu, as well as other somewhat interesting characters. Another hero who is frozen, Messiah? We're going with Messiah, because Messiah sounds a little too religious. Well, she's journeying ahead of the player character, and you must catch up to her to stop the evil empire, and eventually destroy the tower in the sky. The story may be a bit tough to follow on your first playthrough, mainly because the developers didn't always add in the name of the person speaking to you. Sometimes you'll get a telepathic message from someone, and you won't know who it is, but you can usually deduce it if you've been following closely. The dialogue is a bit minimalistic, but it works. Your protagonist isn't silent, which is kind of a surprise. Now, there's something about the game that I can't pinpoint, but it just kind of falls a little bit short. Just a little bit. I still enjoy the game, though, for what it is, and it may just be because of the limitations of the system. But hey, it's still a great game, and it's still a lot of fun to play. Crystalis has pretty decent graphics for the time period. The intro scenes are visually striking, but the normal gameplay is pretty average. Character animations are pretty basic, and while the enemies look varied and neat, some of the backgrounds are pretty bland, especially in dungeons and caves. The overworlds are pretty lively for the most part, but the dungeons are all very similar and easy to get lost in because of how repetitive they look. There are definitely better looking games on the system, but a lot much worse looking games too. The music in Crystalis is really good and gets stuck in your head for days. There are adventurous tunes like the overworld theme, creepy and foreboding tunes like the dungeons and caves, and a lot of other good stuff. My favorite track has to be the mountain theme. Oh man, so good. Gives you that feeling of perseverance, like you can take on anything the game has to throw at you. Crystalis is a top-down action-adventure game with RPG elements such as experience points. You collect items, magic spells, weapons, armor, and shields. Each item has its own unique use, and while some are definitely more useful than others, it's nice to have options when playing the game. There are a ton of different ways to tackle the hordes of enemies you'll fight, and you'll likely find something best to fit your style of play. You will collect 4 elemental swords that allow you to charge up and blast a wave of energy. Each sword has 2 items that give you an additional level of power, enabling you to fire an even more powerful wave. The 3rd level consumes some of your MP to use, but it packs a punch. There are particular obstacles geared towards each sword, walls for the wind, fire, and thunder swords, and the ability to create ice bridges over rivers with the water sword. Some enemies are weak to particular swords and immune to others. This sounds cool in theory, but unfortunately you end up switching between menu and action often to switch out swords. Had there been an extra button to switch weapons on the fly, it would have worked a bit better. Hit detection is a little floaty? I don't know. It seems like enemies are able to hit you fairly easily, while you have to be very accurate with your attacks. You also talk to people by running into them, and it can get annoying if you're trying to get around someone. Again, hit detection issues. If you're playing this game for the first time, it's suggested that you attack from a distance, constantly powering up your attacks to blast bad guys from far away. Once you get used to the game, you can start reliably taking enemies head-on in close quarters combat. I tend to do this to kill things faster. I never come out unscathed, however, and healing is costly in this game. Medicinal herbs don't heal much later in the game, and your healing spell takes a lot of MP as your health bar gets larger. Crystalis definitely has problems in terms of gameplay. Now, those problems aren't so glaring that it hurts the gameplay experience, however. It's still a lot of fun to play, as I keep saying, because it's a lot of fun. You get used to the quirks pretty early on, and unless you don't like jumping back and forth between menus to switch weapons, you're going to have a really good time with Crystalis. The game has a good experience system. Every level you gain, you gather strength, defense, HP, and MP. You are very rarely at a point where you are underleveled if you fight everything you come across. I had to grind at only one point in the game so I could damage a boss, and it didn't take me long to level up. There are only 16 levels to achieve, so that helps in keeping the grind to a minimum. There are a ton of different enemies to fight, each that have their own behaviors. Bosses are fun to enter combat with, and they all have patterns that you need to figure out. They aren't too tough, and that's really not a bad thing. Power up your sword to the highest level and let them have it. There are several different status effects to manage, such as a paralyzing attack that won't let you power up your sword, poisoning, and a petrification attack. You can also be turned into a little blob, but I managed to avoid any of the beams that morph you. This is seriously one of my favorite games of all time, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has ever played a retro game and hasn't played Crystalis. It's got its flaws, sure, but all the good things about it far outweigh those flaws. And I just love it. It's one of my favorite games, as I said. And it's not a hard game to find either. You can get it for about $15 for a physical copy. Maybe even less if you're lucky. There's also a Game Boy Advance version, which you may have seen me reference earlier. And it's about the same price. Not as highly recommended for those of you who like bleeding ears, because the music's terrible. But, you know, still a good port of the game, for the most part, I guess. I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you liked that silly-ass intro video that I decided to do this time. I don't know what it was, I just had an idea and I went with it. So, you know, we'll see how you guys like it. You know, throw me a like if you did. Comment on my video, tell me what you didn't like about the intro or didn't like about the review. You know, subscribe to me if you want to see more of that stuff, because I've got a lot of more ideas and I really want to run with it. So, you know, we'll see where that takes us. Hey, that's all I got. I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks. Later.